Wamanjika, welcome sisters and brothers on a wintry day here in Melbourne. I'm Stephen Barro from the Melbourne chapter of God Squad here in Australia. I don't know about you, but I like to look up to people who live consistent lives, whose actions match up with their words, who walk the walk as well as talking the talk. Whether it's biker culture or mainstream life, we earn respect if our actions match our words, and consequently we lose respect if they don't equal each other. People tend not to take us seriously if we aren't consistent. This is the same whether you're a biker, a politician, a minister, or an everyday person. We can probably all think of people we admire and look up to because their life is a consistent one, yet not a perfect one. People who care for those around them and not pulling others down. Who are those people in your life? We can all think of people that we have little respect for, with their actions not matching their words. Unfortunately, the global church has copped a hard time, and rightfully so, over the past few years, for the exposure of child sex scandals, particularly amongst church leaders. This is the opposite of what Jesus models and calls us to. These actions really undermine our witness in the world today, and we are often portrayed as hypocrites. Jesus has a lot to say about this, and if you claim to be a follower of his, then there is a great responsibility on us to live consistent lives as we attempt to share hope and light to those around us. So what sort of lives does Jesus call us to live? We get a hint in today's reading from Matthew's Gospel in chapter 5, verses 17 to 20. Matthew, a Jew himself, was writing to a Jewish audience where there was a shared understanding of the Torah, or the law, or what we call the Old Testament. The teachers of the law were meant to be the protectors of the law, but more than that, they were meant to be the intercessors between God and the Jewish people to help them connect with their Creator. This passage is in the section from Matthew chapter 5 and to chapter 7, commonly referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. In it, Jesus clearly outlines an alternative way of living for people who claim to be his followers. It is a way that leads to life and human flourishing. In it, he provides hope, meaning, and grace where people can live together in safe communities. He calls it the kingdom of heaven. It is like his core values and the perfect summary about what his ministry is about. He speaks about humility, servanthood, grace, and dependence on God. He then spent the rest of his life living it out. Matthew 5 begins with the Beatitudes, a series of blessings that are so subversive and countercultural to how we see mainstream society acting today. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the merciful, the peacemakers, those who are persecuted, and so on. Not the normal ones who are perceived to be blessed by our world today. He calls us to be salt and light, to love our enemies, calls us to give to the poor, calls us to trust in him and to store up treasures in heaven, challenges us about judging others, and warns us about false teachers and disciples. There is much in there and is worth spending time regularly reading and reflecting on the whole 3 chapters right the way through. In the midst of this, we have today's reading in chapter 5, verses 17 to 20, where in talking about his coming to fulfill much of the law, he goes on to say that our righteousness should surpass that even of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Remember, they were meant to be there for the people, but instead it seems they protected their own self-interests, power base, and looked after their mates. Sound familiar today? These were people who followed the letter of the law, but often ran into conflict with Jesus for not following the heart of it. In fact, there are over 20 recorded incidents in the Gospels where Jesus ran into conflict with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Most of these didn't end well, and most of them were over Jesus living out these principles in Matthew 5 to 7, caring for the poor and needy, exposing hypocrisy, and spending time with those who feel like they didn't fit in, the poor and the outsiders. In other words, the last, the least, and the lost. These were Jesus' priority. His life and our challenge is to live lives marked by compassion, kindness, generosity, grace, and forgiveness to others. This is in stark contrast to what we often see in the world fueled by indifference, selfishness, fear, and hate. He calls us just to not know the law, or to have good head knowledge about his word, but to live it out in our lives, to have our righteousness surpass that of the Pharisees, those legalists who knew the words inside out. So it seems Jesus is challenging and calling us to live lives that are consistent, that seek out the best in others, that lead to hope and life, where those on the margins are included, where justice reigns and has a priority. This is what gets us into the kingdom of heaven that he speaks of in verse 20. Back to the beginning. What does it take for us as followers of Jesus to live lives that are consistent with what we believe, with what Jesus has called us to? There are many temptations and challenges to try and take us away from that call. The temptation to seek power, the temptation to follow after mammon, the temptation to compromise, the temptation to replace God with ourselves, and the temptation to go alone, and so many others. The call and challenge today is to intentionally live a consistent life, to have our words and actions line up, to follow Jesus, to care for those around us, to want the best for others, to practice love, compassion and grace instead of hatred and fear, and to live out the heart of Jesus instead of some obscure law so that we may win an argument. Today, may God give us courage, the wisdom and the discernment of his Spirit, friends for the journey to follow his ways and to be like salt and light, so that instead of being put off by us, others may be attracted to him. Amen.